Within Ciel, there is a lay consecrated life form with a great following called Memoris Domini, which is understood as a form of life where, and I quote, life and body are activated as memory of Christ. Memoris Domini take a number of vows, including the vows of chastity and poverty, and they live together in same-sex small communities, sharing a communal life structured by prayers and hours of silence, while continuing a full-time professional life in the world outside. As such, this life form combines contemplative and monastical elements together with an active being in the world, and it expresses very much the mystical dimension of Comunione e Liberazione. Now, from her first encounters with Ciel, Marta was strongly attracted by this consecrated life and its mystical dimension, and one of the ways in which she spoke about that attraction is the following, and I quote, "Another thing that is important to me and that has always fascinated me, as I told you before, are the figures of the saints, because the saint is the real human being." End of quote. Now, what did Marta mean by real? In her own life story, real stood in contrast with what she considered to be the fake world of her secular, cultural Catholic upbringing before she met the movement. She qualified the world of her family and her school as non-authentic. She also qualified it as bourgeois. This world had not been devoid of various kinds of religious attachments and practices, especially through the figure of her mother. But through the experience of Ciel, Marta had come to feel that kind of religiosity as empty, as not touching upon what matters. Saints, in contrast, directed Marta to where a relationship with the divine mattered, where it touched her and where it touched reality. Now, this reference to what is real also points very strongly to Ciel's theology. Realism is the first premise of Giussani's theology, as it is laid out in his book entitled The Religious Sense, which is a book that all members of Ciel read and reread in a practice which they call Scuola di Comunità, the community school, which is a weekly practice. Now, realism here means, and I quote Giussani, "the urgent necessity not to give a more important role to a scheme already in our minds, but rather to cultivate an entire, passionate, insistent ability to observe the real event, the fact." End of quote. Giussani's understanding of realism deserves a more elaborate and critical discussion than I can present you today, but I invoke it here to further situate Marta's qualification of the reality of saints. To Marta, saints are both touched by and touch upon what really matters, which at the same time implies that they remain unaffected and untouched by the superfluous. Yet by what precisely do they remain untouched? Not by experience, as it is through experience, and often various kinds of tribulations, that the story of their holiness develops. Moreover, Ciel's theological framework strongly relies on the notion of the religious experience, in which Giussani suggests that experience is the method par excellence to begin knowing the reality of an event, and this actually proposes existential inquiry as his realist method. Nor is this reality unaffected by feeling. Saints go through feelings of passions and pain, insanity and exuberant joy, and also the notion of feeling is important in relation to the experience and the reason within which are central within the theological framework of the movement. And I quote Giussani again, "There is nothing that enters our sphere of knowledge, and therefore our experience," he argues, "that does not provoke, stir up, solicit, determine, and thus establish within us a certain state of the soul. And this state of the soul is what he calls feeling." So while experience and feeling are crucial to this understanding of reality, what seems to fall outside the notion of reality, and perhaps even functions as its constitutive outside, is the body. The body figures quite centrally in life stories of saints, and in particular female saints. It is the crucial antagonist in the story of holiness, it often serves as the battleground in which holiness is challenged or established, and starving, torture, and pain are endured. Thus, arguably, the reality by which the saints remain ultimately untouched is the reality of the body. Giussani's theology relies on a dualist relation between body and soul. The I knows itself as being made up of two different realities, matter and spirit, body and soul, that are not reducible to each other, he argues. On the one hand, there is the measurable reality, which is material. On the other hand, there are the I elements, which are not identifiable with the measurable, like ideas, judgments, and decisions. These are indivisible, and what is more, argues Giussani, death does not touch upon them. And now I quote him again, death does not touch the reality in me, which is not divisible, nor measurable, nor essentially mutable. Death is not applicable to me. So not only is the self composed of two realities, the real self, the reality of humanity, is equated with one of those, the reality of the spirit, of the soul, which I'm kind of going very compact through a much longer reasoning in Giussani's book, but which leads him to conclude that section with, I am not my body. Now, as spirit or mind or soul are equated with identity, with who I am, with solidity, the body is considered something extremely volatile, to borrow Elizabeth Gross' expression. The body becomes something the mind must expel in order to retain its integrity. It is implicitly defined as unruly, disruptive, in need of direction and judgment, merely incidental to the defining characteristics of mind, reason, or personal identity. And such an attitude towards the body and towards understanding oneself in terms of soul and spirit traversed many, or I should say all, of my interlocutors, their narratives of self. Now, this understanding of the self in terms of spirit, soul, goes hand in hand with an understanding of the self and of humanity, real humanity, beyond sexual difference, and the idea of a soul beyond sexual difference. At this point, we might argue that a certain transcendence of the body is particularly attractive to women. And indeed, this way of understanding sexual difference in relation to the question of transcendence and immanence has been argued before, notably within feminist thinking on saints and mystics, and notably feminist thinkers who are at least culturally connected somehow to a Catholic worldview. Okay, some of these people are now probably getting upset or turning around in their graves. As Simone de Beauvoir, in her seminal The Deuxième Sexe, where she provides a tour de force in surveying the history, the myths, and the structures of what she calls the situation of women throughout European history, reveals how the subject of women and of femininity is created and invested in continuing women's oppression. Central to de Beauvoir's argument, as we all know, is a suggestion that within a patriarchal gender regime, men are able to realize themselves through transcendence, while women's lot is one of immanence. Beauvoir's analysis suggests that being a woman is inscribed upon the body, which figures the body, her analysis figures the body as a passive medium, and also presents us a subject that is utterly subjected and tied to that body. Unsurprisingly, references to Christianity figure in various places of the 2 volumes of The Second Sex as part of the patriarchal regime that oppresses women, or relatedly, that functions as forms of compensation for this oppression. Yet, amidst de Beauvoir's critique of Christianity, there is an assertion that women can achieve transcendence through their faith, namely in transcending sexual difference altogether, as exemplified by the figure of Teresa of Avila. As Amy Hollywood argues, Beauvoir presents Teresa as an existentialist heroine who is enabled to act through the power of her belief in a God who enables her to be everything. Teresa speaks and acts in ways that indicate an exceptional kind of agency, not available for ordinary women at the time. And in what is considered to be what some authors have commented upon as a viral form of subjectivity, transcending the confines of femininity. Also, Luce Irigaray, I could add the Belgian thinker Luce Irigaray, has argued that historically in the West, female mysticism represents the possibility of women occupying a place of a speaking subject, or even the sole place, and this is paraphrasing a section La Mystérique from Spiculum, or even the sole place within history of the West where women achieved full and autonomous subjectivity. The female saint or mystic's excessive love for God actually transforms her into him, Irigaray suggests. This is the secret of her exchange, she comments. And in this transformation, as in her jouissance, she comments, she loses all sense of corporeal boundary. She again transcends the body.